What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, that's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have a lot to talk about today as we have some brand new developments just in the last hour that have just began to come up on my screen from both my guys at Storms United and from the National Hurricane Center. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So here's the cliff notes that we have for you right now. We now have Invest 97L that will be designated potential tropical cyclone 18 at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time. That's the first thing I want to highlight very quickly. Next thing we're watching, area of interest in the near the Atlantic, near the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. And then there's another area of interest, kind of like a little bit of a ring outside of it. Let me go ahead and show you the NHC. We have an area of interest within an area of interest. Your eyes are not deceiving you guys right now. This is actually legit. And it's kind of funny to see that, but at the same time, we have to watch this because this looks like it's going, at least this area is looking like it's going to merge with Invest 97L very quickly, but we'll have to pay attention to it. We also have subtropical storm Patty out here in the near the Azores Islands to pay attention to as well. We're not going to go too much into Patty but we will kind of start with that and kind of go over a few things. First of all, it's weakened. Its maximum sustained winds have dropped to 45 miles per hour, pressure of 992 millibars, winds of 40 miles per hour or greater extended outward 80 miles from the center. So we're going to have to watch that as well. This is expected to weaken once again, get down to a remnant low as it approaches the Iberian Peninsula and Portugal and Spain. If you're watching from those areas, you need to watch this very closely. This looks like it's going to be a pretty big flash flooding and wind threat. So you're going to have to watch this as this approaches the area. Areas in Western Europe should also monitor this as well. And that's generally the last we will see of Patty until it approaches Europe. So that's the first thing we're watching. Then we have these two areas of interest that are overlapping each other. We'll start the 10% probability since that's the closest to when this is going to happen. So here we go. A trough of low pressure is producing disorganized showers and thunderstorms along with gusty winds over the southeastern Bahamas and adjacent waters. Slow development of the system is possible in the next day or so while it moves towards to the westward towards Cuba and the Bahamas. The system is expected to be absorbed into the low pressure area over the Caribbean Sea by late Monday, ending its chances of development. Regardless of development, locally heavy rains are possible over the next couple of days across the Greater Antilles and the Bahamas. 10% probability of development, but this is expected to merge with potential tropical cyclone 18. That's going to be designated in the next hour. But here's what we have right here going on in terms of this area of interest right here. We have another one that was tagged just this afternoon. An area of disturbed weather is expected to develop near the northern Leeward Islands around the middle part of the week. Some slow development of the system is possible thereafter that time as it moves generally westward over the southwestern Atlantic. 20% probability of development in the next 7 days, nothing in the next 48 hours, so this looks like it's going to be more of a long-term threat, but we're going to have to pay attention to that. And then we have this one right here, which is pretty much the jugular, and I would argue has the best chance of being the last hurrah before hurricane season dies down for this year. Showers and thunderstorms are showing signs of organization in association with a low-pressure system over the south central Caribbean Sea. The system is expected to become a tropical depression during the next day or two, expected now, as it moves generally northward towards Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and Cuba. Interests in these locations should monitor the progress of the system as tropical storm watches and warnings could be required later today. They will be issued in the next hour across Jamaica, Hispaniola, and Cuba during the next few days. Regardless of development, locally heavy rains are possible in those areas. An Air Force reconnaissance aircraft is currently investigating the system, 90% in the next 48 hours and 90% in the next 7 days. Let's go ahead and pull up the Hurricane Hunter aircraft reconnaissance, kind of see what we're looking at right here. They have been finding signs of a developing low-level circulation. They're definitely finding signs of a mid-level circulation with flight level winds around 30 to 35 knots, SFMR readings around 25 to 30 knots. So this is likely a 35 miles per hour tropical system at this current point. And if I can go ahead and show you what we have going on here in our Discord on Storms United. We were taking a look at this stuff. Let's go ahead. We can go ahead and pull that up if we can. Don't think this gives us an option of us doing that, unfortunately. But okay, yes, here we go. So let me go ahead and pull this up. Let me go ahead and zoom in the screen very quickly just to kind of show you. This is what Sakura posted earlier today, about an hour ago from the time of this video coming out. This is what we have right here. Basically, the general cliff notes of this is we're looking at a 30-knot system, pressure of 1,005 millibars, moving currently the 18, which is PTC 18, transitioned. That's when it transitioned from 97L to PTC 18. So that's kind of the stuff that we're generally looking at in those terms. I know it's a little bit ambiguous. I know it's a little bit difficult to kind of read for those, and I'm sure some of you don't know what's going on with that. But I wanted to go ahead and show you that as this has been developing over the last hour or so. So let me go ahead and zoom back this screen back and get this back in order, and then we can go ahead and get to the rest of the video just to kind of give you some ideas of what's going to be happening. Okay, so okay, that's perfect. So let's go ahead and go back to the Firefox browser right here, and then continue our update with you. Recon is currently in there. Once again, they are finding signs of a low-level center of circulation developing, and tropical storm watches and warnings are going to be issued in the next hour. So be sure to watch that from the National Hurricane Center. That's why when I post this at 3 p.m. Central Time, it says PTC 18 has formed, because it technically already has. The NHC is just waiting to give the call for it to do it officially at the next advisory. So that's what we have going on right there. Let's go ahead and pull up some satellite imagery and give a quick analysis to that over here. We're generally going to go ahead and cover the Western Atlantic, since Patty's not going to be that much of a threat. In terms of tropics, it's definitely going to be a large threat for Portugal, Spain, and potentially France if it moves through those areas as an extratropical cyclone, but we're going to have to pay attention to that in the long term. Regardless of that, this is what we have going on. Let's go ahead and zoom into the Western Atlantic Ocean right here. So we have this area of interest, another area of interest overlapping it, and we have this area of interest, which is now potential tropical cyclone 18. So that's what we have going on. We're seeing a lot more sustained convection now than we did yesterday. That's a sign of it developing. We're seeing a better and better sign of it rotating. The center of circulation appears to be right about here or so. If we go ahead and pull it up, it's where the NHC has it tagged at this current point, right about over here. You can tell if we go ahead and zoom in a little bit to 97L. You can tell that we're seeing that area of rotation really starting to ramp up. The center of circulation is really starting to show up over here. We're going to have to pay attention to that as well. So we got that. We have that going for it. The MLC has definitely developed. The LLC hasn't quite yet. The low-level circulation hasn't just yet. That's why they're designating this a potential tropical cyclone. So that's the general stuff that we are taking a look at. This is expected to head towards Jamaica, then the Cayman Islands, and then Cuba. So if you're in Jamaica, you need to be paying very close attention to this, and we will continue to update you on that as we continue to move to the better satellite imagery right here. Here's the water vapor that we can show you right here. A lot more moist air in the eastern Caribbean Sea, and this area of convection has really helped infuse that going forward. We're seeing a lot more convection firing off, and we're seeing a lot more moisture helping the system really organize, develop, and breathe. Yes, there is some dry air over here in the northwestern Caribbean over here, but that's getting mixed out as we speak. We're seeing more and more convection firing off over here near Jamaica and those areas as well. We're seeing a little bit of convection in the Gulf of Mexico. That's more mesoscale convection, so I'm not really that worried about that. But by and large, as this system continues to move further to the west, and as these huge clusters of thunderstorms start to merge with this area of interest, this potential tropical cyclone, you're going to start seeing a lot more moisture infusion in this part of the Caribbean Sea and in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. So that's what we have going on for the satellite imagery. Let's go ahead and go to the current situation that we have with Invest 97L, soon to be potential tropical cyclone 18. 1005 millibars, 30 knots once again. Here's the track models, and here's the intensity. Track models are pretty interesting. They have them shifting more to the west than recently. Before, we were looking at potentially a Jamaica landfall and then heading for the Cayman Islands and staying off the coast of Cuba before entering the Gulf of Mexico and organizing and developing all the way until it gets to the Gulf, until it makes a landfall over there. Now the models have shifted from a potential Florida impact more so towards Louisiana, I have noticed, and that is going to be very interesting to see how that pans out, because it'll give it more time over the loop current, more time over better conditions to continue to strengthen until it reaches the continental shelf. From then on out, water temperatures are going to cool drastically, and you're going to start seeing rapid weakening as it approaches land. Here's what we have going on with the intensity runs. Intensity continues to be pretty interesting. Majority of the models are calling for hurricane strength at least. Majority of them are around Category 1. At this current point, although some of them do have it going up to Category 2, Category 3. The halves A and halves B have it going up to Category 4. The HMON has it going up to Category 3 after it enters the Gulf of Mexico. So we're going to have to watch that as well. We're going to have to pay attention to these models as well, to pay attention to it. But the main question I want to explore based on the conditions is how realistic are these runs? How realistic are these going to be? And what's the probability that we do see these kinds of scenarios, especially on the upper end with the hurricane runs really going haywire with this? Well, let's go ahead and see the conditions. Let's start with the global sea surface temperatures. SSTs, pretty good. They're pretty good in the Caribbean Sea. They're relatively good in the Gulf of Mexico, especially around the loop current, 28 degrees Celsius. That's about 82.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And those waters still go relatively deep as well. I want you guys to keep that in mind. But the main area for strengthening, in my opinion, is going to be in the northwestern Caribbean Sea. Because right now, the system is still relatively broad. It has tightened up quite a bit, but it's still a relatively broad system, and if you keeping that in mind. But regardless of that, we're seeing that tightening of the gradient. We're starting to see the pressure drop a little bit more, and you're starting to see more and more convection start to wrap around it. My opinion, it's not going to start taking off until it gets past Jamaica. Jamaica could potentially see a 40, 45, 50 mile per hour tropical storm. If it gets impacted by that, I know the models have shifted a bit more to the west. We'll have to see if that trend continues or if it pushes back further to the east. We're going to have to see what happens. What I do know is once this huge blob of convection fires off over here and merges with potential tropical cyclone 18, then you're going to start seeing a lot more signs of development, a lot more signs of potential intensification, and we're going to have to watch that and pay close attention to it. In terms of what we see in the Gulf, like I said, you start seeing some warm waters initially, and with the further shift of the track to the west, you're seeing that shift more towards the loop current. That's going to give it more time for organization, more time for strengthening as well. But after it crosses, I'd say the 27-degree threshold, it's going to stop intensifying. It's going to start weakening, mainly due to the cooler waters. The water temperatures near the Louisiana coast around 25, 24 degrees Celsius. That's about 75 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not nearly enough water to sustain a hurricane, let alone a major hurricane if that were to happen, but we'll have to pay attention to that as well. I do expect it to weaken as it approaches land, not only just due to land interaction or shear, but also due to cooler waters, so we're going to have to pay attention to that. Ocean heat content, this is what we have going on. The most ocean heat content the system's going to be over, because the shift of the models to the west, is generally in the northwestern Caribbean Sea. What you're going to notice now is basically you'd see more of quick development, more rapid development instead of maybe over near Jamaica, more towards the northwestern Caribbean Sea. That's generally what I've been watching for the last a couple of days, and generally what I've been watching over the last little while as I've continued to see these models shift back and forth, and then swing hard to the west as of this last run. We're not sure if it's going to stay there for the 0Z. We're going to have to pay attention to it, but this does look like the Gulf Coast is going to be impacted by some sort of tropical system. We're going to have to watch how strong it gets, and we're going to have to see what happens in the Caribbean Sea. But most likely, from what we're seeing with these track runs, majority of the runs want this to impact and make landfall in western Cuba before entering the Gulf of Mexico, which if that were to happen, normally in terms of land interaction, you would say it would be really good news. It would slow down the development, and it would help kind of disrupt this core of it a little bit. There's one little problem with that. Geographically speaking, that little area in western Cuba is some of the flattest terrain on the island. I'm going to go ahead and pull up Google Maps real quickly just to show you that. Let's go ahead and pull that up, and we're going to go ahead and go over to Cuba just to kind of give you a general location and general idea of what we're looking at. Let's go ahead and shift down to Cuba over here. If we can go ahead and get the satellite view, that would be nice. As well, the satellite view is as well, just to kind of give you a general idea. But here we go. This part of Cuba, the Pinar del Rio region right here, is generally the flattest part of Cuba. So whatever system does make landfall doesn't weaken that much or doesn't weaken at all. An infamous case of that was Hurricane Ida back in 2021. Hurricane Ida, what ended up happening is it made landfall, but not only did it not weaken, the core of it also organized even better in those areas right there. Now, if it does make landfall in the Isle of Youth, that's also a relatively flat area. It might have a bit more of an impact than mainland Cuba, but right now we're going to have to see how this pans out and see where it makes landfall in Cuba. But the further west in Cuba it does, the less likely of an impact it will have. But regardless of that, that's what we have going on. Here's the wind shear that we have pulled up for you right now. Wind shear has been pretty interesting to watch and interesting to see what happens. You are seeing the wind shear starting to weaken in the western Caribbean Sea. You just see a small pocket of 30 knots of wind shear. That's going to move out of the area in the next little while. We're going to have to pay attention to it. But once that area does, and once we get down to about 15, maybe 20 knots of wind shear, that's when the system is going to end up going off. And in terms of what we see with this wind shear pocket over here in the Atlantic Ocean, what we have going on over there, we're going to have to see how that kind of plays into the whole shear business over here in the Caribbean. If that shear starts to inject into the Caribbean Sea, that's going to be a very bad sign for those who are going to be impacted by it. So we have a relatively big situation going on right now across much of the Caribbean, much of the Gulf. We're going to have to watch. We're going to go ahead and show you some runs now. Let's go ahead and pull up the hurricane runs. We're going to go ahead just to kind of play around with these, just to kind of see what the realistic scenario is with this and what's unrealistic. Let's go ahead and start with the HMON. This is the 12Z HMON run. HMON wants the system to get up to hurricane strength before it makes landfall in Jamaica. Keep in mind, this was before the model shift to the west. Then it moves near Cuba, makes landfall and exits near Havana, then enters the Gulf of Mexico, starts to weaken due to the cooler waters as it approaches Florida, and that's pretty much what we have going on. I would say that due to the track shift and the reconnaissance being out there, that's no longer a realistic scenario. I do not think Jamaica is going to see a direct landfall from potential tropical cyclone 18 anymore because of how far to the west this has shifted and how far to the west the models have shifted. So generally, I don't see that as much of a realistic scenario. Track-wise, intensity-wise, I could definitely see that as a realistic scenario. Let's go ahead and pull up the halves A run. Organizing, developing, moving west of Jamaica right here, gets down up to major hurricane strength in the Caribbean Sea. It's a relatively small and compact system. It has it making landfall in Cuba as a high-end Cat 4, which I'm going to be brutally honest with you guys. Unless this system explodes over the Caribbean Sea, which it very much might, this is a relatively unrealistic scenario. This is calling for a 150 mile per hour, 917 millibar system that is very compact to make landfall in Cuba. Then it enters the Gulf of Mexico, starts to weaken slightly due to the cooler waters, and it remains relatively compact. I'm going to be brutally honest, the halves A and halves B are pretty unrealistic, not just because because of the intensity of this system, I don't think it's going to get up to high-end Category 4 or anything like that. For me, the ceiling of this is probably 100 miles per hour. At this current point, but we'll have to see what happens. But it's also calling for a much more compact system when the system's been relatively broad this whole time. But by and large, we're going to have to watch and see what happens, and we'll continue to keep you updated here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. Shout out to Daniel as an official sponsor of the Pat's Path Predictor Patreon. If you want to come join our Patreon, support the channel more directly, it's the first link in the description down below. Be sure to join our Storms United Discord server. Link to that is right over there. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.